1824 was the first election to reliably record the popular vote, or how many people voted for each candidate. As more states granted white men the right to vote, the election of 1828 promised to be even bigger, and Andrew Jackson was gonna be ready. The people were gonna be his path to victory, and he would make a path to the people, a literal path. Roads, canals, and turnpikes connected north, south, west, and all points in between. News traveled along these paths 7 days a week thanks to a reliable federal postal service. It was the age of what Henry Clay called the American system, a bustling infrastructure funded through tariffs and loans from the Second Bank of the United States. Clay was a big supporter of the American system, as was John Quincy Adams, which made Clay a supporter of Adams in 1824. The American system flourished with Adams in the White House, and this coincided with a host of technological advances, including in printing. Towns big and small had their own daily newspapers, and the American system helped bring those newspapers to households around the country. More voters, more roads, and more newspapers got more Americans involved in politics. 1828 was going to be a big year for them, and Andrew Jackson. As John Quincy Adams waited to be inaugurated president in 1825, Andrew Jackson's hometown newspaper, the Nashville Gazette, declared that Jackson would challenge Adams for re-election in 1828. Newspapers around the country did the same. The Tennessee legislature formally nominated him at around the same time. Times were changing. In Part 1, we saw how members of Congress nominated candidates from their party, a process that took place behind closed doors in Washington, D.C. But Jackson was nominated by the people and the states, far away from the halls of Congress. It was a mass movement. Without TV or internet, mass movements were built through newspapers. When newspapers reported that Henry Clay said Andrew Jackson was a quote-unquote military chieftain, unqualified to be president, Andrew Jackson leaned into it. He reminded the country of his heroic battles defending America against native and British attacks. He reminded them that many Americans also had served in the military. Was Henry Clay saying all of them were not good enough to be president? Didn't a military chieftain named George Washington turn out to be a pretty good president? Andrew Jackson was a master of public perception. He had an instinct of knowing exactly what he needed to say to get people on his side. While Henry Clay and John Quincy Adams were playing by the old generation's rules of elitist politics, Jackson was playing the new generation's game of mass politics. And politics is nasty business. Newspapers spread Andrew Jackson's accusation that Adams became president due to a corrupt bargain with Henry Clay. Jackson had no evidence of this. Clay chose Adams because he honestly thought he would be a better president. Adams was one of the most honest and qualified men to ever hold the office. None of that mattered. Adams spent his 4 years as president under a cloud of suspicion ginned up by Andrew Jackson. This was just the beginning. Before Adams was Monroe's Secretary of State, he was an ambassador and diplomat who served in many countries around the world, including Russia. Jackson started a rumor that Adams procured women for the Russian Tsar. Again, Jackson had no evidence of this. It was a total lie.
The Russia witch hunt was a plan by those who lost the election. Sick. These are sick people.
But Jackson's allies repeated it so much in the press that people thought it was true. This is the downside of mass politics. The truth doesn't matter. Whoever can manipulate public opinion wins, truth be damned. Many politicians between then and now have understood this, but Jackson was the first.
Many of the facts that Trump asserted were also completely untrue. But Trump didn't care. He and his audience knew that much of what he said bore little relationship to reality. The version of reality that politics presented was no longer believable. That the stories politicians told their people about the world had stopped making sense. And in the face of that, you could play with reality.
The rise of AI and deepfakes in 2025 are just the newest weapons in political wars that got their starts in newspapers in 1825. If Clay and Adams wanted to win the war, they would have to get dirty too. Everyone in Washington knew Jackson's reputation as a gambler, carouser, and hothead. Newspapers loyal to Clay and Adams spread these tales about Andrew Jackson. They circulated a story from his days as a general during the Creek Wars, where he killed 6 American militiamen. They accused him of killing a man in a duel. Most of these stories were based on truth, at least more truth than the stories being spread about Adams. But the most scandalous story was about Jackson's marriage to his wife, Rachel Donaldson Robards. She got the last name Robards from her first husband, Lewis Robards, who she married in 1785. Lewis was a jealous man, especially when he suspected that young Andrew Jackson also wanted her. His jealousy drove Rachel away to Natchez, Mississippi, which was Spanish territory. It was around this time, around 1791, where Andrew and Rachel started living as husband and wife. Nobody knew them in Natchez, so people didn't question them. But records show that Rachel didn't officially get a divorce until 1793 and didn't officially marry Andrew until 1794, which meant they lived in adultery for around 2 years. Out of all the rumors that circulated about Andrew, this is the one that hurt him the most. Not only was it true, but he honestly loved Rachel. And here were his political opponents dragging her name through the mud. These rumors attacked the 2 things most dear to him: his country and his family. He saw himself as a defender of both. What kind of a general executes his own soldiers? What kind of a husband lets his wife be called an adulterer? For Andrew Jackson, the election of 1828 was personal. It was personal for the voters, too. Some voters did see Jackson as an immoral, unreliable, loose cannon who should never be president. Many others, however, saw a war hero being attacked in the media by arrogant rich guys in Washington, D.C. Jackson had an instinct for reading the mood of the people.
It looks like they are attempting to move him out, that he may have been injured.
Newspapers that supported Adams started referring to Jackson as Jackass and even drew him as a donkey in cartoons. Rather than get upset, Jackson made the jackass a symbol of his campaign. By 1828, Jackson had built a national movement around himself. Adams sometimes called this movement the democracy, which was not a nice thing to say at the time. It meant the people, the loud, dirty, ignorant, poor people. As far as Adams was concerned, Jackson was the leader of a mob. Nobody knew it at the time, but Adams had just handed Jackson the name for a new political party, the Democrats, symbolized by the jackass. The Jeffersonian Republicans were no longer the only party in town. The Democrats were here. As far as Jackson was concerned, the Democrats were the true apostles of Thomas Jefferson. As Jefferson himself lay on his deathbed in Virginia, Jackson tried to convince him to publicly support his presidential campaign. The best he could do was a statement from Jefferson wishing John Quincy Adams would lose in 1828. And lose he did. For the first time in American history, over 1 million people voted, almost 4 times the number of votes cast in 1824. About 56% of them voted for Andrew Jackson. There was no need for the House of Representatives to get involved this time. No opportunity for Clay and Adams to steal the presidency through backroom deals. The people had spoken. The democracy had triumphed. Andrew Jackson was the choice of the new generation. The pain and insults Andrew and Rachel endured were vindicated. Rachel wasn't too thrilled about being First Lady. She didn't necessarily relish being a public figure. But as much as she would have liked to retire quietly, she would go to the White House with her husband. Jackson spent the weeks after the election in his Tennessee plantation, the Hermitage, responding to letters of congratulation coming from friends around the country. A week before the Christmas of 1828, he was writing a letter when he was told that Rachel had collapsed. He rushed to check on her, but she was in bad shape. Jackson finished his letter by writing, "Mrs. J has been taken suddenly ill, with excruciating pain in the left shoulder, arm, and breast. I hope for her recovery." But recovery never came. She died on December 22, 1828, just weeks after the election. For the rest of his life, Jackson would blame Clay, Adams, and their supporters for her death. They had caused her so much stress that it put her in her grave. He didn't have time to mourn. In January 1829, a few weeks after burying his wife, Jackson left Tennessee for Washington, D.C. He was heartbroken, but he had a duty to lead his country. The people were calling his name. Inauguration Day was scheduled for Wednesday, March 4th, 1829. 20,000 people packed into the Capitol grounds to see the ceremony, probably the best attended inauguration since George Washington. He gave a short, vague speech, took the oath of office, and bowed to the crowd. People were only able to recognize him by his shock of white hair. Meanwhile, John Quincy Adams was already on his way home to Massachusetts. He didn't stay for the ceremony, didn't want to see the man whose vicious campaign of lies destroyed his presidency. In Adams' mind, it wasn't the America he knew anymore. Gentlemen like him weren't in control. The democracy was, and they were all there celebrating Jackson. Adams only learned of Jackson's inauguration from the boom of the cannons that were fired in celebration. Jackson got on a horse to ride to the White House while the people followed him and cheered. They then followed him into the White House for the reception. It was overflowing with people, the American people who had elected him. Farmers, craftsmen, boys and girls, men and women. They yelled, drank the White House alcohol, and stood on the furniture trying to get a glimpse of the new president. His aides had to surround him to keep the crowd away. They eventually snuck him out of the White House while the people stayed to party, destroying all of the carpets and furniture in the process. Jackson's opponents took this scene as proof that the democracy was just a barbaric mob, with Jackson being the head barbarian. For Jackson's supporters, it was a fitting start to a presidency chosen by the people. The people's president had brought the people into the people's house. But what would the people's presidency look like? The country wouldn't have to wait long to find out.